Welcome back to Orange Hat Reviews, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day. Let me just see something here. So, I got a couple of announcements before we get this thing started. I have been suspended from Twitter. My primary account is completely suspended. It is gone. I don't know when I'm going to get it back. I kind of misbehaved. And they completely suspended me, which is absolutely ridiculous considering the thing I did, other people did about other people, and yet they still have their Twitter account. So, yes, I have been suspended from Twitter. However, I do have the backup one, OHR 20 or OHR 2. So yeah, follow me on that one, please, and thank you. So, with that out of the way, the mystery movie review. Sorry, I just blanked for a second. Hold on one moment. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. I had to take care of something extremely quickly. But yes, the mystery movie review. The first hint was that it was a movie that came out in 2016 and that it was a movie that felt like a sequel but was not a sequel. The second hint was that Margot Robbie had a part in this film. One person on my primary now suspended account managed to guess it. Other people did not. It is The Legend of Tarzan. Now, this movie actually happens to be a very interesting movie. The casting was very well done. Christopher Waltz as Leon Rom was brilliant. You had Margot Robbie as Jane. That was a great casting piece. Alexander Skarsgård as John Clayton III, Tarzan. And those are basically the three that were the main importance of the film. Now, there was some other casting that I thought was brilliant. Let me pull that up. Yeah, well, this knows what I want. Very good. So yeah. Also, this movie does also star Djimon Hounsou and Samuel L. Jackson. And Casper Crump, that was the other guy who played Major Kurchikachik or whatever. He was one of the main baddies that was next to Christopher Waltz's Leon Rom. Now, basically, this movie takes place 10 years after the events of what the story of Tarzan was. as I said, this movie has more of a feel of a sequel to a story that was already well told. So there was, I guess, no reason to um, really tell it again. Hold on one second. Again, sorry about this. Okay, I'm back again. Sorry about that. Now, one of the things that I did like about this movie was the casting. They had Samuel L. Jackson. They had Alexander Skarsgård. He's actually a pretty good actor, in my opinion. Margot Robbie, she did a good job in this movie. Christopher Waltz was a villain like any or unlike any other that I've seen. Pompous, yes. Arrogant, yes. Sure of himself, absolutely. But the way that he displays it is it's just somehow gives off a different vibe. He's smart with his pompousness. He also has his insecurities, pretty much wears them on his sleeve, but also continues to display a surety of himself. He's willing to call out other people. He just plays that very well. The one of the harmful factors of this movie. Hey, Happy Dino, thank you. Also, make sure that you're following or you turn the notifications on for my secondary Twitter account. I have been fully suspended on my first. But yes, Christopher Waltz's character as of Leon Rom was actually very well done. Alexander Skarsgård playing the duality of John Clayton and Tarzan, and also blending them, was very well done. This is a man who is kind of torn between his animalistic side as well as his noble side because he is a lord or he's a member of the House of Lords in England. And this basically picks up where he and Jane have returned to civilization. This is 10 years after the events of Tarzan. And so he is a member of the House of Lords. He is a lord in England. He is John Clayton III. That is what he goes by. And at the beginning of the movie has Leon Rom going into a part of the Congo called Opar, which Jaimin Hansu plays the chief of a tribe there that slaughters all of his guards and all of his military escort. The Legend of Tarzan with Sam Jackson. Yes, this is that movie. And so they tell him, I know what you're here for. And if you do something for me, you will have all the diamonds you want. And he makes the bargain. He's like, bring him to me. So then there's the orchestration of getting John to try to come back to Africa, where a bunch of English pompous idiots go to try to convince him, John Clayton III, Tarzan, to come back. And you see Sam Jackson just munching on walnuts in the back, crushing them and whatnot. It's like, oh my God, this thing is boring. And so, they explain the whole situation that King Leopold II has basically gone bankrupt trying to trying to control his territory of the Congo. And it's a very interesting thing because it's like, okay, so the Congo was originally invaded and taken over. So then you hear, or then Samuel L. Jackson is like, and I thought the Civil War was long. And they're like, you're a guest here. He's like, let's just basically say what we're all here to say. You are Tarzan. Tarzan. Jane. Me Tarzan, you Jane, and all that stuff. Tarzan. The only reason why King Leopold wants you there is because you're a celebrity. He just goes full pomp. And then you see John Clayton, or Tarzan, he picks up his little teacup, sips it with the pinky up. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. And then he just tells him, no, I've seen Africa and it's hot. And then when he gets up to leave, he turns to Samuel L. Jackson, and my name is not Tarzan. It's John Clayton III, son to John and Lady Alice Clayton, 5th Earl of Greystoke, member of the House of Lords. Basically reminding or pointing out to Samuel L. Jackson's character, George Washington Williams, that you'd do well to remember you're not in America, you're in England, and you will respect our customs here. And one of the customs is you address a lord by lord. And this is during the 1800s, so that is also a good thing. And now they, so when he then goes, he's like, I'm sorry about that little show back there. I need to talk to you, and I need to get your invitation to, or I need to be a part of your invitation to Africa. I need you to accept Leopold's invitation because America wants, or America's interest is, or we are curious to see how or why Leopold's hold over the Congo is still going when he's basically bankrupt. And he believes that there's a slavery aspect to it. So yeah. And now this is a brilliant part in this movie because after he agrees to it, after Tarzan or Clayton agrees to it, he's being carted off. And when the sun hits his face, you hear him you see him go like this. And now you'd think that's just a sharp exhale, but no, that's part of his animalistic nature. Remember, as a baby, he was raised as an ape, or as a Mangani ape. He is not, or he's neither really human nor ape. He's of both worlds. He's an animal. But he's basically playing at being a human, so to speak. So, yeah. He basically does show that he has that. And I love how they also show the flashbacks of the original story of Tarzan, the shipwreck of John Clayton II, his father and his wife, how she got sick and died. And as he buries her, Kerchak and his troop find Tarzan's dad. And they end up killing him because, well, he did attack Kerchak. He threw a rock at him and he didn't submit. Now, if he would have submitted, Kerchak probably would have spared him, but he's like, nope. And then Kala goes up and finds the baby Tarzan, and she is basically tolerated, I would say is the best word for it. I'm still thinking that it's interesting, a bankruptcy plot, considering most government function in debt. Yeah, it is. But King Leopold or the rest of the governments were literally planning on calling in Leopold's debt. The problem is nowadays we have governments operating in debt and nobody's going to default the loans. I mean, if I remember correctly, Disney operates in deep debt. Why haven't anybody defaulted on their loans? They're not bringing in enough to cover the debt. But yeah. So they cover that, and then he goes in, and the introduction of Jane, where she's teaching kids about Africa, and she sees her husband, and she's like, now, can anybody tell me what sound or what my favorite bird's sound is, or what sound it makes? And she knows that her husband will be able to mimic it perfectly, and he does. He starts whistling the bird call, and all the kids see him, and they go up and they're just asking him all sorts of Tarzan questions and whatnot. And then one kid points out, look at his hands. His hands are never straight. They're always like this. They're always like this. And the bone structure is also changed in his hands because when he walked on all fours as a kid, or he ran on all fours as a kid, he or it changed, or it caused his hand structure to change, and he actually puts his hand down like this, and then puts it onto the hunches of his knuckles, and you see the knuckle area right here expand outward a little bit to form a more massive hand, so to speak. And I actually think that that is a great thing that they did in this movie. They brought a more physics kind of, or a more anatomically correct um look of Tarzan, where his bone structure would have changed from his acting. He always does kind of have a hunch when he walks, because he was always hunched down when he was on all fours. This is something that he grew up doing. So, yes, his body would have grown accustomed to that look where he's always hunched. He's never straight up. You rarely ever see his hand go like this. The only time I've ever seen him fully extend his hand was when he was sipping his tea and he brought the finger up. And it's like, whoa, okay, this makes sense. This is something that actually is a good touch that they added into this film. Him going up into the tree with his wife, because when he tells them, or he tells his wife that he's going back to placate and be a chaperone and be a friendly face for Leopold so that England will help pay Leopold's debt, she's just absolutely giddy. And he's like, this isn't a holiday and you're not going. And she's like, John, I already know the danger. Every time you fall asleep, it's 50-50 that you get eaten by something. And he's like, and she's like, you haven't said his name in years. Is that really what's bothering you? And he says, Mabonga is not my concern. You are. We lost a child. The last thing you need is more stress. He's being concerned, but he also is afraid that Mabonga would try for retribution, which is indeed what's going on, because Leon Rom met with Mabonga and Mabonga wants him back to Africa so he can take his revenge. What the revenge is, we have yet to figure out. So later on, or she says, I want to go home. This is our home. And then he gets reminded as he's sitting in his study, one of his servants brings I think they're like some kind of bird egg. They're pretty big. They're about this big from inside the hand. About roughly the size of my glasses. And so then he drinks out of them like they're a drink, he doesn't eat the egg, he just slurps it. And you show Kala and young Tarzan back into his father's makeshift house in the trees. And you see Kerchak outside stalking the house, and then you see him at the door. Now, for those of you who don't know, Kerchak is the head of the Mangani apes, the apes that Tarzan became a part of. Kala was his ape mother, and she was always helping him. Another good touch is that they didn't give Tarzan a loincloth. He was nude the entire time. They didn't show the kids or the child version of Tarzan nude. They didn't show, or they mostly kept there was no nudity in this movie. Any nudity that was suggested only. Back end only. And they didn't even show ass either. This is a PG-13 movie. So when you see that Kerchak chases him out, it's very rapid moving. You don't see, or when you see little Tarzan trying to get away and screaming because he's afraid for his life, and Kerchak still catches him, he curls up as Kerchak is pounding the ground around him. Kerchak is basically letting him know, you will never be one of us. You are an abomination to our troop. The fact that Kala keeps you around is basically the only reason you are alive, is because Kala adopted you. That is Kerchak. He didn't like Tarzan. He never did. the real story of Tarzan, or the original story of Tarzan, Kerchak never accepted him. It was only after Kerchak died that Akut, his brother, or the other ape that is Kala's actual son, he took over the troop and he did accept Tarzan. So the rest of the troop did then too. And you see young Akut letting him know that it's okay to get up, but he doesn't get up because he's still scared. The backstories and the flashbacks are all great touches. They are at the point, or they're introduced at a point where it serves to know, or where it serves the plot to give you additional context. That's what the flashbacks of the story of Tarzan are meant as, to give you additional context. And that is an interesting part of this movie. That's why this movie feels like a sequel instead of an actual alone or by itself movie. And that is a wonderful thing. Now, they get to Africa, and the place where they're supposed to be getting off in Boma is basically, or they didn't get off in Boma. They got off earlier because they knew that they wanted to take their own trip to the Kuba tribe. And Tarzan is greeted by 3 lionesses. When he immediately gets down, looks at him, and they recognize him, and they start cuddling each other, and he starts rubbing up against them. They rub up against him, like a feline would, of a person that they trust and have claimed. Well, he's known them since they were cubs. Jane points out to George Washington Williams, or Williams, Samuel L. Jackson's character. And it's a nice touch that Tarzan has not forgotten who he is, or John Clayton has not forgotten that side of him. He's always had that side in him. He's now bringing it out again. And when he gets to the Kuba chief comes out. He's like, Tarzan, you look funny. It's just a very caught off guard moment that they're not speaking a foreign language, but he just greets him in English. And it's like, okay, so chances are he learned English somehow, which is then explained that Jane's father and Jane, they taught the Kuba English and customs and whatnot. And so it was a happy reunion. They never touched the house that Jane and her father had, or since they left. It's like, as per custom, it's been untouched since you've been gone, or until you've returned. And the house, or the home that they have, is a little bit of a caved in roof and whatnot. It hasn't been touched in 10 years, It's a good realistic touch. And then they have their nice little passionate moment. But unfortunately, Leon Rom also had planned, or wanted, or he knew that Tarzan got off and went to the Kuba. So obviously, him and his mercs went to intercept. Now, the guy who is the head merc for Leon Rom is played by Casper Crump. Casper Crump, the only thing I've ever seen him in otherwise is The Flash on the CW and Legends of Tomorrow. He played Vandal Savage. He played that role pretty well, too. He plays the role of this guy as well, too, the lead merc, Kerchak or something. I can't pronounce his name. But he does a wonderful job as a lackey, basically. So they capture Jane and they capture Tarzan. They actually do capture Tarzan. And as they are pulling him back or tied up, you see Crump's character, the head merc, he's like, you got a nice catch there. I guess you got tired of all the negresses and baboons. They had a different style of talking back then, folks. Full disclosure. Back in the 1800s, they did refer to blacks as Negroes and negresses. They had a different aesthetic to how they talked. So I see that there are 5 people in the chat. Please feel free to smack that like button or slam it or push it or however you feel to address it. Also, I do want to remind people that there are, or about my suspension on Twitter. I have, or my main Orange Hat Reviews account has been fully suspended. I was naughty. And so, yeah, you can follow me on OHR21 at OHR21. That is my main account, or that is now my new account. So please do give me a follow over there, and I will follow back as many people as I can. I've been doing that for the last 4 hours since I've been awake. I've been awake since 5, so yeah. But yes, back to the review. He got tied up, and the way that they tied up Tarzan is like they have his legs up and his hands behind his back. He's tied up with ropes around his neck. It's like, holy crap, man. He's tied up like an animal. He's hog-tied, basically. He's hog-tied, and they're carrying him with a net around him and whatnot. Leon Rom kills the Kuba chief because he wouldn't kneel. He's like, a Kuba chief does not kneel. And so he sees that Tarzan's coming for him, so then he just kills the Kuba chief. And while they're trying to get away, you hear a gunshot and go down. And then you see Samuel Jackson. He's like, or his introduction, he just comes into camera, guns up, and starts, or it's like the perfect gun intro to a character. It's like, yeah, get him. And so he manages to get them to drop Tarzan, but they still have Jane. And he manages to save Tarzan. And I love the scene between Christopher Waltz's character and Jane, Leon Rom and Jane. I need you to scream for me. What, like a damsel? And she just spits in his face. This is how a good, strong female character is done. She doesn't discard men. She's not hateful of men. She's just not going to put up with that bullshit either, you know? She's like, I'm not a damsel. So the next morning, Tarzan, I'll just call him Tarzan. He feels guilty. He's like, they came for me, Quete. And he's like, you did not cause this. This has been going on since you, or even before you came back. Slavers have been in the area since before you came back. Because they also did take 10 Kuba tribesmen. Or they said, round up 10 of the strongest. We need porters. And so they took, 10 of them, including Jane's friend Wasimbu. And I got loose skin on my lip. Sorry about that. But anyway, so now there's the whole tracking them. Or like they're going to be going upriver to Mabonga's area. We can take the Mangani lands and we can come out ahead of them. And they're like, this way is a lot, or no, there's a different route that we could take. It's like, that is longer. And he's like, not with the train that they have built. We can intercept a train and we can ride up. He's like, okay, then. Now, he then learned who Leon Rom is from Samuel Jackson's character. And they all have to go on the chase. But I love that before they do, he tells Williams, Samuel L. Jackson's character, you can't keep up. And the tribesmen also try telling them, he's like, if you fall behind, that's certain death. He's like, I've been in the wilds all my life, or half my life. I know how to keep up. And he's like, and then he tries dirt talking Tarzan, saying, if it wasn't for me, he'd still be choked out redder than a cardinal's ass and whatnot. And Tarzan he's like, puts him up against the wall and choking him. He's like, you think I care about my life? If I hadn't what, John? They have my wife and their families. That is why I'm doing this. I don't care about my life, basically, is what he says. And it's a really brilliant take because, well, he is a guy that is literally torn between two worlds and he has to embrace his animal side again. He tried getting out of it, but going back to Africa, yeah, he had to re embrace his animal side, the side that is Tarzan. He's not running on all fours, he's still running on his hinds now, but you get to understand that this is the kind of stuff that he had to deal with during the flashback scenes with how Jane narrates, and also when the Kuba sing the Legend of Tarzan, you see the scene with the cheetah of where he fights the cheetah and it leaves, and you see his brother Akut is with him and accepts him and whatnot. You see that he does kind of had matted dreadlock kind of hair because of how he is living in the woods with the Mangani. This movie does have such great objective writing quality. It also has great directing. It has great cinematography. The only thing that really does hurt this movie is a forgettable score and a the CGI element, because the CGI is slightly dated, but it actually is done very well in certain areas where John gets on the train and they get their evidence of the slavery as per William's suspicions. He then gets off the train and he's like, "We'll go with you. You can't. 7 people would be considered a raid. The Mangani would kill you all." He's like, "The Mangani? You mean those? You mean those gorillas that you were with, or that you grew up with? They're not gorillas." He's like, "I don't get it." And they actually explain, it's like gorillas are placid, they're not aggressive. Mangani are very aggressive and they're bigger. And I'm like, okay, that's the difference. That's why they call them Mangani and not gorillas. This movie pays attention to detail, which is actually very good. It helps those who are lost in some ways that you can keep up. It gives you the background. Um it gives you the knowledge you need to stay up to date with the movie. And that is why it is such a great movie. Objectively, I would put this movie at a 9 out of 10. It is that good. The CGI and the score are the only real problems with it. And I would only put the CGI at a 0.5 and the score at a 0.5 because it doesn't really hurt the film too much. However, the daytime CGI does have a problem with it. That is where it hurts the most. The nighttime CGI is better because, well, shading, and they always do a little bit better at night, you know? Now, when he gets in and the Mangani find him and Williams, he's like, "So how do you want to play this?" Their leader will come down, we'll fight, and it'll play from there. He's like, "You got to fight one of them?" "Oh, I wish. I have to fight a coot." "A coot? He was my brother once, or now he'll see me only as a deserter." I love how he knows, or how he handles this. Also, the swinging scene, the vine scene. There was a bit of a blue screen mishap there. There's also lighting issues with this movie. During the night scenes, there are lighting issues because, and I'll explain it after the fight scene. But when the vine scene, where he's swinging with Samuel L. Jackson on his back, you could definitely tell it is not a real swinging. Um, it's very close up and very little wind to the swinging. But that is also a really bad objective quality. But other than that, I honestly had no problem with it because it did get the purpose served. But when he fights a coot, the suits that they have, the people who play the Mangani gorillas, or the Mangani apes rather, they have people in these gorilla shaped suits. They also have a clear plastic thing that gives you the face, so that when Tarzan is actually interacting with these creatures, you actually find it more believable because you actually see the touch. His arm isn't going through one of the digital apes or the digital Mangani. So when he's fighting a coot, he's fighting a coot. He's fighting a person that is there with with a mocap gorilla suit. And it's actually very well done. The fight takes place. John gets his ass kicked. And when a coot goes at Samuel L. Jackson's character, he's like, or Tarzan tells him, get on your knees and bow right now. Expose your most vulnerable parts. So, because he was leveling his gun on a coot. And so then he puts his gun, he gets down to his knees, a coot roars at him. And then he drops down groveling level. And that's when a coot stands up. He's like, you want me to lick his nuts too? If you want to live. And you see the revulsion on Samuel Jackson's face. And I'm like, he's seriously considering this? And he even calls it out. He's like, George. He's like, I wasn't going to do it. It looked like you were. So, a coot moves off and yanks John forward, dislocating his arm. He's made his point. He also bit him in the back as punishment for deserting the troop. So he had to basically fight a coot, and in a way he knew he was going to lose. He had to fight in a way that he would be able to live and pass through unharmed. He had to get respect again, basically. And it was well done. He actually fought a coot. He actually got a good couple shots in where he hits him with the stick, and the coot's like, and just goes right swinging back as soon as he gets hit. He barely felt it, basically. But when Tarzan actually does do a gut shot, you do see a coot actually react. He's like, oh. And that's when he tries getting on his back and whatnot. This movie does have a realistic tone to it when you fight, or when he was fighting his brother. Hey, my bro, what are we reviewing today? Legend of Tarzan, Kamen Rider. Also, follow me on OHR21 on Twitter. My main account has been suspended. But yes, so Samuel L. Jackson, he's like, he's gonna relocate his arm, pop it back in. He's like, just so you know, I wasn't gonna lick his nuts. It looked as if you were. And I'm like, oh my god. It's a nice point of levity just after a very tense situation. And so he pops it back in, and at night you see him pulling ants off of a ant mound area. These are big ants. They're like bullet-sized ants. And they're literally using that to stitch his arm, or where a coot bit him. They're using the pincers from the ants and then popping the head to keep the thing, or the pincers, pinched to keep it from getting infected. And he's like, are you eating them? He's like, yeah, just like bacon. And you see that Samuel L. Jackson's like, yeah, give me a big fat snake any day. But then he actually tries one of the ants. He's like, okay. He's like, you talk a big game until you learn something, and then you actually give yourself away when you eat it, or when you do it, even though you say you won't. Tarzan actually calls him out on it. He's like, yeah, well. And then you get the backstory on George Washington Williams. He's like, I fought battles like this before, the Civil War. But then we handled the Mexico situation. And then we had to handle the cavalry with the natives, or the Indians, and how he had to slaughter natives and whatnot. He's like, I ain't any better than those Belgians. He has that moment of weakness, that moment of vulnerability, that moment of guilt. And it really does give you a chance to humanize and to relate with George Washington Williams. How, yeah, he's not just a perfect guy. He has made his mistakes, and that will come to play later on in the film. So when they're still trying to catch up, And Jane actually does have interactions during all this time. They are cutting back to Jane with Leon Rom. And they have a little dinner thing where Jane does try to do something stupid, and Leon Rom just uses his rosary, which is made of Madagascar spider silk. It's very tight woven, and it can be used as a choker. So he yanks her over, gets her to grab her own salt, and then brings her back over, and then unlatches the thing. He's like, my pastor bought this for me when I was 9 in Jerusalem. And she's like, she's like, sounds like you and your pastor were very close. Why? You get that he may have been very close and intimate with his pastor. So yeah. You then understand the reason why Tarzan or Mumbonga is out to kill Tarzan, because he's like, it seems that Mumbonga has a real hatred for your husband, but for the life of me, I cannot determine the cause. And so Jane tells him, he's like, he killed his only son. And you then later on see a flashback of what happened, because the Mumbonga's tribe hunts the Mangani as a rite of passage. And unfortunately, how you doing, Pastor G? Listening from work right now. I forgot about this movie. Thank you for the review. You're very welcome. Also, Pastor G, make sure that you're following me on my backup account on Twitter, because Twitter did suspend my main account. So, yes, you learn that Mumbonga's only son killed Kala, Tarzan's ape mother. And Tarzan rightfully went after his son and killed him brutally. He crushed him. And you also see the flashback of how earlier on you see the flashback of how Jane and Tarzan meet, and how Kerchak finds Jane, and how Tarzan protects her. He gets over her while Kerchak lays the beat down on Tarzan, and so she takes him back into the wood, or into their home, to help him heal. And you also see Kala outside calling for her child, essentially. And it's a wonderful thing. Is your main account gone, or can I get it back? I can access it. I cannot do anything on it. It simply says your account is suspended. You cannot do anything about it. So I'm guessing this is a long-term suspension. I don't know if I can get the account back. They haven't given me any way to unsuspend it. So for the foreseeable future, Kamen Rider, I am on OHR2 or at OHR21. My backup one. OHR2 is the name. But yes. So as she then attempts an escape, she tells Wasimbu, who's locked up in a cage because they figured out that she and him are friends. And she's like, get the tribes together. Do not try to save me. Run as fast as you can. She knows that they're in the Mangani lands. So they drop him because they said, if you go against what we tell you, he'll drown. And they're also going through a patch of hippopotamuses. Now, everybody knows, if you know anything about hippos, they're the most dangerous creature in Africa. They can open their mouths as wide as 6 feet freaking wide. Like, that area there is 6 feet wide. These things are dangerous. They could snap a croc in two. So you see her jump as well, and they get to the land. They have to stop the boat and whatnot. And back then, this is a boat that you can't exactly just hit the brakes on, you know? So they go through the Mangani land. She's like, go, they will follow my tracks. And so she runs into literally a Mangani troop, or a part of the Mangani troop. and their nests and area. And so she gets down and gets submissive, and Leon Ramen is and his his mercenaries are also there. And he's like, weapons down, let me go in, retrieve her. And she tells him, promise me you will not hurt them. And he nods to her. And so he takes her hand to let the Mangani know this is acceptable. This is our mistake. We're leaving now. So, yeah. Unfortunately, there was a merc that got a little too scared. Pulls the trigger, all hell breaks loose. Tarzan hears this from a distance. He hears this, and he hears Jane say, "Don't hurt them," and he knows that that is in the main direction where the Mangani's nests are. So he decides to just say, "Fuck you," or "Fuck it, I'm going. If you can't keep up, you can't keep up. Too bad." There was also a moment earlier in the film where he's like, how are we going to catch a train going 40 miles an hour? Gravity. And they jump off a ledge, and Samuel L. Jackson is so hesitant. He's like, shit! And then he just jumps. That was also a great point in this movie. I know it's a little out of order, folks. But when Tarzan gets there, he also saves Akut from getting shot because there were people that had their sights fully trained on Akut. And Akut sees that he stopped him. He's like, or he sees Tarzan there. He's like, okay, you just saved me. I'll accept that, or we'll accept this, and we'll fight again with each other, or we'll fight them together. And you see how Tarzan is just fully there again. And he's not going to, or he's back with his troop. And his troop has now accepted him again. It is a wonderful moment how you see that they are helping him. Then it does cut to later on they're following a guy. Now you see that there's this one merc with a umbrella, and you see that Akut and Tarzan let this guy go for a little bit. But when Samuel L. Jackson's character comes in, you see the umbrella down, and that guy's gone. He's dead. Basically, it's saying, you attacked our family. You're only going to be allowed to think you're going to live. And that is a nice touch. It is dark. This movie has such a realistic aspect to it. It's not a Disney movie. It's great because it's a movie that does put a more realistic edge to this movie. It's dark. It's grittier. It really does make one think this could be a realistic telling of the story of Tarzan. And it is just that well done. Now, earlier I did say that objectively this movie is a 9 out of 10, and I will stand by that, even with its flaws. However, subjectively, I will put this movie at a 10 out of 10 because it is thoroughly enjoyable. Now, moviegoer, 10 out of 10 still. A lot of people say that there's a sluggish pace. It's like, maybe here and there it could be a little sluggish depending on what you're here to see. But if you are paying attention to it from a story aspect, this movie actually does have a pretty steady pace for the most part. Now, when they get to Mbonga with Jane and they're getting the diamonds, and you hear Tarzan's ululation, his cry, that one. It's that I'm like, did they really have Alexander Skarsgård do that? And I thought that it was a good touch. And so he gets there, he grabs a broken antelope skull, and he uses that as like a knife. He uses the horn as the handle, and the shards of the skull as a knife or as a cutting tool. And he's going through Mbonga's men, and then Mbonga gets in. He's like, and they start fighting. He's like, if you let that man get away, he'll come back and slaughter you all. He's like, They just wanted the diamonds, and he's trying to reason with them. He doesn't have any personal animosity towards Mumbonga or Jaimin Hansu's character. He's basically just trying to tell him, look, you know nothing of what is going on. And so then he wins the fight and has the knife up to Mbonga's neck, and he's like, I have your chief under my knife, and all of you are now under my knife. And he's like, you killed my son. And he's like, your son killed the only person I ever cared for. He's like, it was an animal. She was my mother. So you see that he has never let that go. You see that he has always seen the Mangani as his family. And then you see the Mangani coming in and breaking the troop up. And you also see George Washington Williams, Samuel Jackson's character, get in there. And he's like, all they wanted was the diamonds. He's like, they wanted them, but they'll also, you think that you're sitting on a huge diamond reserve. They're going to come back and mine all of it, and they're going to kill you to it. And he's like, no, we would stop them. So then, as I said, Samuel Jackson's vulnerability and his guilt comes into play later on. This is where it does. He's like, you think, or they will come back and slaughter you. You think that, or look me in the eyes. You're looking at a man who's seen this happen. And so now the Mbonga let him and John go, as well as the Mangani. So at the port of Boma, where they get with the diamonds, he's like, get the guy off the train, let him, or so now that he can pay for the mercenaries to basically fund an army of Leopolds so that they can keep control over the Congo. Well, John and George are looking down, and he's like, hey, we're going to play some. Or he's like, wait, where are you going? To get some friends. Now he's got his lion friends, his lionesses, with their mail, and he's got the Mangani leading or helping him get a stampede going of wildebeest-like creatures, animals. And I'm like, this is the worst of the CGI, but also there is a moment I forgot to talk about. I'm sorry. The moment with the elephants, where this is after the fight with Akut, where the elephants see that Tarzan is back, and so they go up to talk to him. He's like, my old friend. And he puts his hand on the alpha's trunk, and he's like, the Teke say that an elephant's language, or elephants speak the greatest language. What else can make you feel so much without a word? And I'm like, they're not wrong, man. I got tears in my eyes just looking at them. And you even see this little one going up and getting Samuel Jackson's character's attention. And he leans down and pets it and whatnot. And it's like, it is a very touching moment. But also during that moment, when they're at the fire getting stitched up, that's when it betrays the background green screen or blue screen, because the background's not getting lit up by the fire. You can't see the shadow or the flame shadow, but you can see it off of Tarzan's character. So that is another objective flaw, but it is also a very beautiful part of the film. Now, the ending of the film is actually very interesting because it does show that these pompous idiots who are all living under Leopold's reign, it's just really, it's like, oh my gosh, man. So the whole fight sequence between Tarzan and the mercs, you see the head merc, Casper Crumb's character, get killed, stampeded to death. You see him get onto the ship. You see, but before he does get there, you also see that Samuel Jackson, he's like, grabs one of their automatic guns and just shoots the hell out of this boat. And Christopher Waltz's character, Leon Rom, is still alive. Tarzan gets on the boat and bends the steam heat or the steam pipes to get to help build the pressure and get it ready for an explosion. He then also gets choked out from the spider silk necklace or the spider silk rosary by Rom, while Rom is then calling for one of the guys to get his portly ass over here, and he's like, "Come get your diamonds." And he does tell him, he's like, so then he manages to loosen it up and starts doing another animal sound. You then see the crocodiles head right back in because there's crocodiles in the area that were attacking the people for Tarzan's team, you know? And so then they're heading back in, and he's like, what's that? I didn't hear it. And he tells them, mating call. And that's when he leans back, and that's the end of Leon Rom. So then they get back up, and it's basically the good guys win. And then a year later, they're still in Africa. You see Wasimbu, his friend, or Tarzan's friend from the tribe, is sitting with Tarzan, and then you hear all the women singing and dancing and whatnot, and they have a baby in their arms. Well, that happens to be John's baby with Jane. They actually managed to have one because they did miscarry the first time. Now, then that is great. Good guys rule. Yeah. And then that does basically draw the movie to an end where you see him swinging with the Mangani again because he does choose to stay in Africa. You also see that Leopold, or you hear a narration from George Washington Williams, Samuel L. Jackson, about how America is now seeing to the prosecution of King Leopold, and Leopold was using slavery to gain a hold, even though slavery is outlawed. Thank you, Jade. Thank you for lurking, and hope you got your shopping done. But yeah, you already know about my suspension on Twitter, so I don't need to remind you of that. But yes, then you see that Tarzan has stayed in Africa. Greystoke Manor is still there, or still in England, but they hadn't returned, you know? So it's still there waiting for him to return. But so he did decide to stay in Africa at the end of the movie. And he also does go back into the Mangani to maintain his relationship with his ape family. Now, this movie does have problems with it. The CGI and the score are its weakest points, plus the lighting in certain cinematography areas that I did go through. However, this movie does have a wonderful script. It has wonderful writing, acting, directing. David Yates did a great job with this movie. And I honestly cannot say that this movie is anything less than a 9 out of 10 objectively. Subjectively and moviegoer, it is a 10 out of 10. This movie does richly deserve those scores. A lot of people think that it wasn't good. It actually has a bad score on Rotten Tomatoes, and I'm like, you guys not understand anything about film quality? Jeez. And yes, this movie, again, I do reaffirm, it has a feel of a sequel instead of by itself standalone film, because it takes place years after the events of what we all know to be the story of Tarzan, where he is growing up under Tarzan, where he meets Jane and all that. This is the story after the continuation, but there was no movie to take place before it or to express all that. And that's why this movie does have the sequel feel to it. So anyway, this is basically the review. And I want to thank everybody, Jade Shadow, Cayman Rider, Pastor G, Happy Dino, for all tuning in, and anyone who hasn't said anything in the comment section. I thank you all for tuning into this one. Stay tuned for next week, where I will do another mystery review. And stay tuned for Friday, where I do Star Trek versus Star Wars, the Trandoshan army from Star Wars versus a Klingon army from Star Trek. And I will have DJ Odyssey, Ambassador, Annihilus, and Price is Right Review joining me on that one. Anyway, folks, thank you for all tuning in. And I want to thank you all for getting the word out. Yes, I am suspended on Twitter. My main account is. So please let other people know that they can follow me over on at OHR21. That way I can get my following back up, because I had over 1,000 followers on my first one, and I only got like 159 followers on this one. And sadly, Gina Carano is not following this one. And I also got to try to get Axel to follow me on this one, because he only followed me on the other one. So yeah, I got a lot to do to rebuild my following on Twitter, because the fucking assholes on Twitter, they don't understand a joke. They honestly don't understand a joke. And it kind of pisses me off, because the joke I said was told by many other people on a more serious level, and they all managed to keep their damn profiles. But anyway, I do kind of feel it is a double standard. Anyway, folks, yes, I was naughty. I got to deal with the consequences, but I would appreciate any help and support you guys can get me on Twitter to get my following built back up. Hopefully Stephanie will follow me, or Steph Tugs and them and all will follow me on my secondary account. That way I can keep in touch with them as well. But yeah, you can also find me on Minds. I do have a Discord and whatnot. I'm also on Facebook if you need to find me there too. But yeah, follow me out on all those places. And at OHR21 or OHR2, you'll be able to find it. It's my old logo. I'm not going to put up the new one because, well, apparently they also threatened if they find out that you are using another account, they'll suspend or they'll completely permanently ban me from Twitter. So fuck them. But anyway, Twitter is SHO right now. But yes, thank you all for tuning into this review. Set your reminders for the other one. Go to my playlist for the versus streams, and you'll find it. S2 versus streams. You'll be able to find the latest one in the playlist. And yeah, I will talk to you all on other streams if I'm invited on and whatnot. Anyway, folks, thank you all for tuning in. This has been Orange Hat Reviews. Stay humble.